Welcome to another episode of the Future Dreamers podcast. I'm Kathryn Loeffler, the creator of Starelai, my favorite astrology app. Um, Obviously, it's my favorite because I made it. Dad jokes, and I'm not even a dad, but I am a dog mom and a mom to like a million cats. So, what are we talking about today? One of my absolute favorite topics, the birth chart, which, if you follow my Instagram at all, you'll see that the way I describe the birth chart is as a map of our psyche. And what can you do with a map of your psyche? Well, many things. So I will try and keep this episode within 25 minutes, but this is a big topic. And this is like the first thing that I would kind of recommend that you take in as you deepen your interest in astrology. If you're new to astrology, this is the perfect place to start. If you are very practiced in astrology, then I may still have some different takes on this that I think you may resonate. We'll see. Leave me a comment. Okay, so the birth chart as a map of our psyche. It is a extremely cool tool because if you were like me, I grew up in the 80s. My parents were doing their best to keep it together, but they were not explaining to me that as a human, we go through many development cycles. Everything was kind of just like go to school, get a good job, don't go to jail. And those are good tips for growing up. But they don't really give you a concrete understanding of who you are. You kind of have to like figure that out on your own through the school of hard knocks. And I think that what the earth needs from us for humanity to surmount the coming meta crisis, which I kind of will probably talk about ongoing as I continue to make episodes. Is that everyone come into their unique gifts as who they are as an individual, meaning that we truly individuate as humans, as individual, elements of our species, that we become individuated in our unique gifts so that we can become powerful creators in the world. And why would we want to do that in this time and space, exact place where we are in the world right now? Because we live in an extremely complicated world that is going to require many different solutions in order to surmount the meta crisis, which is, the big ball of challenges humanity is facing, like climate change, ecological disaster, agricultural disasters, the economic crises we see, wars breaking out all over the world. We'll go into that topic in some other time because today is a happy episode because it is the entry point into truly discovering yourself and how your psyche functions. So let's take a brief tour of how your birth chart is actually constructed. And again, don't stress if these are totally new terms to you or you kind of like this is a first pass for you in terms of birth chart dynamics. Okay, so in a birth chart, what is it? It is a snapshot of the sky where all of the planets were when you were born. Hopefully the doctors captured the first moment you took your first breath, and that would be, your birth time that gets input into calculating a birth chart. And so basically we take the longitude and latitude of where you were born at the date, time, and hour and minute of where you were born, and that's what we begin with. Okay, so imagine you've put that into whatever birth chart tool you're using. Please use Starelai. It's the best. And so we get your birth chart. It is a dial that contains a wheel of houses, and it contains you'll see the wheel of the zodiac layered on as well. And then you'll see a bunch of glyphs that represent the planets. And then you'll also see a bunch of lines that represent geometric alignments between different planets in your birth chart. And those lines called aspects have significations, archetypes of relationships between planets. So today, as we discuss the birth chart as a map of your psyche, we're primarily going to talk about the planets because this is the first step. Really, all you need to know to kind of get into the beautiful, warm pool that is, or ocean of understanding what your birth chart is. So we have our birth chart. We see that there's a dial of houses. We see that there's a wheel of the zodiac. We see there's a bunch of lines crisscrossing everything, and we'll tackle those later. Just, if you can remember, those are called aspects, and they mean something that we'll talk about on another episode. But today, let's talk about the planets, because when we think about human development and the way our psyche works, I think a lot of times we don't understand that we intuitively understand that our psyche is complex and that it's multifaceted. But just like our body has different organs, our psyche has different functions. And if we can put a name and an idea of what a function is to each part of our psyche, we begin to understand, I can actually sort through the different nuances of how I show up in the world as you express your psyche by just living. And then you get an understanding of how each of your psychic functions. When I say psychic, I'm not talking about, like clairvoyance and things like that, although this is all related at the end of the day. What I'm talking about, let's just get into it. I think examples will make things feel more tangible. So I'm going to start with your sun. Okay, when you talk about the sun, people talk about it in kind of surface level astrology as it's your ego. It's kind of like the, your core individual ego characteristics. And yes, it is that. But I think a more helpful way to think about the sun in your birth chart is the vitalizing force that integrates the entire rest of your psyche, which we're going to go into as we continue in the episode. And so I'm going to probably just give examples of my own birth chart as we talk through this, because I know my own birth chart the best. Okay, so I'm a Scorpio sun. And what does that mean? I'm going to do an entire different episode on the Wheel of the Zodiac, because that is another fascinating model of the life cycle of consciousness. But we won't put too much on the frying pan in today's episode. So I'm just going to talk about my zodiacal placements and just, subscribe to the podcast and you'll get the whole educational tour as we go. Okay, so my sun is in Scorpio. The archetype of Scorpio, we know that Scorpio is in the end of October, November. It's the fall. It's when the balance of sunlight to moonlight or sun to nighttime is skewing towards night. It's an internal reflection time. It's a very magical time. So the Scorpio is a master of transformation. At the shadow, it can be jealous. But as it spirals up the octave of its capabilities within the archetype, the Scorpio is a master of understanding the cycle of death and rebirth. It wants to get underneath things and understand the hidden causes of whatever it is looking into. And so my sun in Scorpio, that archetype means my vitalizing energy. What gets me excited about the rest of my life has this flavor. If you think of the planets as the character and the zodiac as the costume that they are wearing and how they're going to present in the world, basically, I love the mysterious, but because I want to understand it for a purpose. And in all facets of my life, I understand that transformation is necessary. So my ego moves towards hidden things, but to uncover the deeper truths. And it understands that there's a cyclical nature to every process in life. And I am willing to let different parts of myself die so that new parts can be reborn. Okay, so that's the sun. And your sun may fall into any house. And I recorded another episode that explains the dial of the houses. I feel like this is not talked about enough in astrology, and I think the dial of the houses is so fascinating because it gives us a model of how to develop our creative potential in this life based on our individual unique sparks. But I did a whole episode on it, so I won't go into it here. Okay, so number one, we've got the sun. Next, let's talk about the moon. The moon is, if the sun is a masculine figure, we can think of the moon as a feminine counterpart. And so the moon kind of represents our emotional nature, our internal world. And it is kind of an intermediary between our inner world and our outer world. And your moon will fall into a certain zodiac sign. So my moon is in Leo. Leos can be hot tempered, but what they really want to do when we go into the entire zodiac in another episode, what you'll see is by the point of time where Leo is the season we're in is Leo, you've individuated to the point that you want to put yourself on display for the world. You are ready to show your creative impulses externally to the world. And so, like I think of Jennifer Lopez as like the ultimate Leo. She hasn't been having a good year, so the tabloids say, and who gives a shit? She is fabulous, and she wants her creative gifts to be on display for the entire world. And that can come with drawbacks. You can realize that once you put yourself on display, people can have a lot to say about that. And so I happen to have my sun in Scorpio square my moon in Leo. And again, this is now getting into aspects, so I don't want to go too deep here. But it's an area of tension that requires development for me to bring the interior world of my moon, my emotional nature, and the moon can also represent unfinished business from past lives, which I think is a fascinating concept. I love to look into near-death experience and past life things. I'm not here to convince anybody about it. It's your choice. You use your discernment to believe and feel what you feel. But so the moon can give us this almost like itch, as if the grain of sand that is in an oyster eventually creates a pearl of maybe something, a characteristic, a quest in a past life that we didn't finish up. And emotionally, we are going to be drawn to that in this life. And so again, think of the moon as the feminine counterpart to the masculine side of our sun. And it reflects our ego back to us because the moon is the reflective body that catches the sun's light. That's why we see full moons, or that's why we see the moon in the sky at all. And so again, the moon as an intermediary between our inner world and our outer world is a really important concept to keep in mind. And as it is our emotional nature, this is also where we can gain over time as we experience our emotional nature. How do we gain emotional mastery? And it's not, as we start to see, the goal of your birth chart is to synthesize all of your parts so that eventually you work as a fully tuned, individualized instrument. And so as we keep talking about the different planets, we're going to see how other planets have an effect on how we can, over time, as we mature, gain emotional mastery that's represented by our moon. All right, so the next planet we're going to talk about is Saturn. These don't go in order of the planets as we see them from Earth, but one of my favorite astrologers, Dane Rudyard, has this concept of planetary pairings and how the different archetypes of each feminine and masculine planetary pairing counterparts really serve the functions of each other when brought into deep balance. And so Saturn is, in regular astrology, talked about as the lord of time and karma, structure, boundary, limitations. It can get a bad rap, which I think is part of like the side of fear-based astrology that I hope is going to be on the decline, because I don't think there's anything to be scared. The planets are not causally affecting us. They're not going to jump in and cause you to get into a car accident. They are simply representations of a higher order of our psyche that, gets into the as above, so below axiom, which again, we'll talk about that in another episode dedicated to magic. But so Saturn, we know the surface level descriptions talk about it as a planet of limitations. And I like that description when you change the perspective a little bit and say, we all need a limit to ourselves because we all need a boundary. Your skin, as one of the biggest organs in your physical body, is the boundary that separates you as an individual from the rest of the world. If you didn't have skin, you'd be hanging out all over the place. It would not be a pretty sight. And so if we think about Saturn as the structure that houses us as individuals, well, then we see why we would want discipline, because it takes discipline to build structure. And if we take some plant analogies, Saturn is like the stalk of the plant that needs to be deeply connected to the roots. So you can also think of Saturn in terms of root chakra energy. If you do not have your core skeletal stalk of your body on lock and erected with strength, you are going to have a hard time producing the flowers that you as an organism have the potentiality to produce. And so that is why, when we think about Saturn, don't think of it from a perspective of nervousness. Think about it as the archetype of your Saturn is where you will learn so much about how to garden the structure of your individuality so that you have the strength, your stalk, your spinal column can carry you throughout the environment of your external world, as well as protect the boundaries of your inner world. So talking about emotional mastery when we were talking about the moon, if you have a well-gardened, well-tuned Saturn, then you are going to be able to protect yourself so that your moon, your feminine, feels safe inside your body to experience the full range of your emotions. But you are going to be able to steward them so that your emotions are within your control as much as they need to be, so that you don't kind of topple your progress of where you're moving towards your dreams. My Saturn is in Libra, so I've experienced a lot of hard knocks about my how I've moved in my social world, and realized when I didn't have my Saturnian boundaries erected when I was a younger person without discernment. I mean, I didn't even know the word discernment meant anything but having good taste until several years ago. So I learned so many lessons. My Saturn return was a hot mess. In retrospect, I understand exactly why it shook up what it shook up in my life, so that I could learn boundaries, because my Saturn is in the 11th house in Libra. So it's all about learning lessons in social groups. And I had to learn a ton of discernment quickly. It took me maybe a little bit longer than I wish. But now I understand that I garden my boundaries. It doesn't mean I'm mean. It doesn't mean I don't let anybody in. It means I'm discerning about who, gets my energy and is in my world, because that is how I maintain my capability to master my emotions and walk through the world as an emotionally centered person. Okay, so then let's move on to Mercury and Jupiter. Those are a pairing. So within the context of your psyche, Mercury is your function of communication. This is the sphere of your intellect. This is when you pop off and roast someone because they, messed with your friend, or, whatever it is, or the way you are able to synthesize information and communicate it clearly. All of those kinds of things really represent what Mercury is in your psyche. And so again, your Mercury will be colored by the characteristics, the costume of the zodiac that your Mercury falls in. So I happen to have Mercury in Scorpio. So I have as we go through this, you'll see I have a big Scorpio stellium. What's a stellium? It's when you have 3 or more planets very close together, kind of like a big conjunction. A conjunction being an aspect where planets are next to each other or in very tight orb. And so Mercury in Scorpio can, again, the archetype of Scorpio wanting to get under the surface, always being that detective kind of energy and understand the hidden so that it can be brought to light. But as we continue to talk about how to use archetypes are a ladder of frequency range of a certain pattern or universal characteristic of human experience. And so Scorpio from a communication standpoint, it can kind of shoot low, it's very quick-witted, but if you're not using it to your highest capacity, you might want to roast people. And I remember in my younger years, in my 20s, if I had a good girlfriend and her boyfriend was acting a fool, I I acted like I was on Comedy Central and I had a microphone and I would just roast these fools like they were, kebabs. And while it definitely did result in comic relief and, transmutation of anger and sadness or whatever through comedy, I didn't have a good limit, and I think sometimes I could take it a little too far. It never skewed into action, but I don't know. It was not the most mature side of me. So, fully owning that I had to raise the octave of my Mercury in Scorpio so that I was using it for a higher purpose. And in the 11th house, which again, we'll talk about houses some other time, I'm not meant, I should not be running around the world just complaining and then, making fun of how much everything sucks. And that can be what a low level Mercury in Scorpio does. And so now I've raised that. So I take my intellectual capacity and I definitely want to get under the surface of why things in my environment are the way they are, such that I know they need remediation. I know that they need to be guarded to a higher level. I now use my Mercury in Scorpio for that kind of investigation, not to just, roast people. And so as we talk about the shadow, Mercury being a pairing with Jupiter, essentially Mercury is the handmaiden of Jupiter, which we know is the great, like benefic planet, the planet that expands everything it touches. So Jupiter is where, similar in a way to the North Node being our higher purpose or where we want to go in this life, a little bit ascendant vibes, but not quite. Jupiter is where we can find higher calling. Jupiter is where we can find higher purpose, a bit in line with what our soul's purpose is. Mine also happens to be in Scorpio. So again, my higher purpose has the flavor of wanting to understand hidden subterranean subconscious matters and bring them to light. The process of diving to the depths of the human subconscious and unconscious and bringing what is found there up to the surface for transmutation. And so my Jupiter, the purpose of my Jupiter is basically dependent, how much progress I make in that purpose in this life is dependent on my Mercury. How can my intellect serve furthering my purpose? And so that is how you can kind of see the pairing between Mercury and Jupiter in that respect. And so that's why, as you see, Jupiter can also lead towards, what we move into excess with. And so, almost the archetype of the glutton. I mean, gosh, if you've ever seen me around a bag of Siete churro chips, that is my Jupiter going hard as a motherfucker on a bag of chips. I mean, I'll eat one in a sitting, which is, I'm trying to be honest here, but I'm working on that. And so when we have our Mercury tuned to our highest purpose, it serves Jupiter, which wants us to expand our highest purpose. And so, again, the birth chart, when you install all of these archetypes into your mind, you start to connect it to your heart. And then you start to see that there are octaves to every function of your psyche. And it's really through the course of experience in your life that you meet the shadow, you understand why the shadow came into your life, and how do you move it up the scale of octaves so that you're eventually, when you become a true individuated, mature person who's capable of being a high-level creator in the world, you're functioning at the superpower. You've already integrated the gift and you've thanked the shadow for being a great teacher of lessons. All right, so let's move into the next planetary pairing, which is Mars and Venus. So Mars being a masculine function within our psyche, Venus being a feminine function within our psyche. And you'll see that Mars is how we take action, the brand of how we move out into the world and we seek outwardly, because that is where we will gain experience. And it is almost like a very Aries style of energy where it just wants to move outward, to grab, to act, to build. And so I have my Mars in Capricorn, which is that energy of persistent, consistent energy that can just like continue to make progress. Capricorn has its own shadows. So Mars, this is where we start to blend archetypes and understand that, Mars, when it's not well guarded, may be impulsive, impetuous, aggressive, the energy of war. But when it is highly tuned and gardened, it is the masculine energy of building. And so for me, with my Mars in Capricorn, it's also in my first house. It's one of my unique characteristics. The way I take action is consistently, persistently, and for the long haul. But I also have to keep in mind, what are the shadow characteristics of Capricorn? I can be hard-headed. I can be stubborn. I can think I'm right when I'm not. And so that is where, by understanding this archetypal, blending and pattern in myself, when I, can catch myself in these unconscious patterns of taking stubborn action, that's when I recall myself to say, I need to integrate this and move up the archetypal ladder towards the gift, so that one day I can see, the tip of the mountain towards the superpower. Now that we know that Mars is how we take action, Venus is the feminine receptive quality of the action we go take out in the world. So think of it as like, if your Mars is out gathering the pollen, pollinating all the flowers, and then it's bringing that pollen back to the beehive, and that is the raw material of the honey that will eventually be made. Your Venus is that receptive quality that loves, it is your aesthetic value of beauty, how you synthesize and value beauty in the world. My Venus is in Scorpio. Again, all this Scorpio stuff. It's kind of a weird placement for Venus. It's not, it is kind of in its non-exalted function in Scorpio. But I like to think of Venus and Scorpio as I can see the beauty in death and rebirth. I can see the beauty in experiences that have life cycles, that have valleys and peaks. And I want to get to the bottom of things that on the surface may look one way, but I can almost taste that they would be available to be transmuted into a higher quality of beauty if we can get underneath and figure out what's really going on. And especially because that Venus is also in my 11th house, it focuses towards the collective. So I love to create spaces where people can gather in groups and community and experience the beauty of group dynamics. But I also was like a jealous person when I didn't have a clear understanding of my Saturn, when I didn't have good boundaries, when I didn't understand my deep, unique spark and how I'm going to bring that unique spark out through my creative acts in the world. So again, this takes time to really install in your brain and in your mind. And really it's about connecting your mind to your heart, of course. But when you start to understand these archetypes, what they do is they help you recognize patterns. They help you bring consciousness to unconscious patterns. And then the archetypal ladders, the archetypal spirals, help us bring ourselves from the shadow to the gift and the superpower. And I'll keep saying it because it's just so important, because it's so useful in our real lives. So okay, again, Mars, the outward action, the masculine side of taking action, and Venus is the feminine receptive quality of the action we've taken in the world. So that's why it's so important to understand the quality of action we take in our life, and then because that is going to create the beauty that we see. So I hope that's making sense at this point. And just dropping it here, my Instagram DMs are always open if you have a question about how to use any of this information or astrology in general. And so that brings us to the end of the planets of the conscious. These are the Saturn and inward planets. Then we start to get into the planets of the unconscious, and they don't work in pairs so much as they're a triplet. They are a trinity: Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And these are, again, the planets of the human collective unconscious. They basically are the repository of all archetypal patterns that have been birthed on Earth, haven't been birthed on Earth. And how do they get to Earth? Well, through humanity. And so Uranus, starting there, it also kind of like Saturn gets a bad rap as if um as if like it's the wrecking ball, like the Miley Cyrus song of our lives. Like when people have big Uranus transits, you can almost smell the fear of people being like, what's gonna get, blown up in my life? And I think that that fear might have some truth to it, but what I really think a way to meet it consciously so that you don't have to have any fear around it at all is when you know you have a big Uranus transit coming, that is a signal that something in your life is going to have to make way for deeper dreams that are meant to be the building blocks of what future humanity needs to thrive and succeed. And you're being asked in that season of your life to be a builder of future humanity. And so I think that really speaks to the whole ethos of this podcast being future dreamers, is how by gardening ourselves can we be stewards of the future? How can we, by claiming our unique individuality and then growing our ability, as you see, I'm thinking of my birth chart as I speak to this level, this wheel of human development. Because if you don't understand your unique capacities, your actions, your purpose in life can be co-opted by people who don't have your best interest at heart. Your power can be taken away. So this entire exercise is really an exercise of installing our unique power, because we understand our unique gifts. And we know that if we don't have the Saturnian structure in our lives, if we don't take right action with our Mars, if we don't know how to receive deep beauty in our lives through our Venus, if we aren't communicating at the highest octave of our Mercury, which serves the purpose of our Jupiter, it's not going to be the life that we deserve at the highest level. And so that is why sometimes when you're just in generally out of tune with all your psychic functions and you are unconscious as to their inner workings and how they work together, how they find deep synthesis to play as a tuned harmonic instrument, when Uranus transits come for you, they might just have to remove some things in ways that are uncomfortable so that you can bring in the next phase of Neptune and Pluto. But when you have taken care to garden all of the rest of your conscious planets, then and if we remember, our sun is that vital force that vitalizes all of our parts, the type of fuel you run on. So I run on Scorpio fuel. When you've met your conscious planets, you understand your archetypes, you understand how they play together, and you've brought consciousness to all of that. Uranus doesn't come for you in a negative sense. It comes to assist you in the deep and deep building process that is going to give you so much satisfaction when you realize you are a channel for the dreams of the collective unconsciousness. This is when the universe starts to work through you. And that's really exciting. I just went through a big dose of Uranus opposition transits. Again, we'll talk about that in an episode on aspects and transits. But essentially, there were some uncomfortable moments, but because I was following my transits and I was understanding the archetypes, I understood what Uranus wanted me to get real and remove from my life, remove complication, remove the over curiousness and trying to do too many projects, because I needed to focus on one in order to be the highest capacity channel for the dreams that then Neptune, so Neptune being the second planet, the second in the trinity of the three planets of the human unconscious, or collective unconscious. Neptune is that oceanic planet of dreams. It can also lead, when it's not gardened properly, into disillusionment, boundary dissolution, a bit like Jupiter excess. It can lead us into addictions. But when we understand that when Neptune transits come into our world, and I've had 3 Neptune square Neptunes, and some of them felt so dreamy it was uncomfortable. I was having, it's when the veil gets very thin. But because I had a pair of 3 of these transits, each one functioned as a phase, and I got to meet Neptune in more dimensions and understand how to stand in my power, how to stand in my Saturnian structure, so that I can be a clear channel for the Neptunian impulses, the downloads that come through that Neptunian dreamy force that we all have as a function of our psyche. My Neptune is in Sagittarius, also in my first house. So I have like Sagittarius, Mars in Capricorn, and dreaminess, from my Neptune function, all as part of my unique spark. And I'm going to do a whole episode on kind of like understanding like groupings within your psyche to see how the energies play, because you can really start to understand your deep, this is where you start to really feel that your birth chart is such a unique, almost like DNA level blueprint, like a genetic blueprint of your soul's purpose. But anyway, so my Neptune being in Sagittarius, I can play in my imagination like I'm watching movies and change the channel and get curious about all kinds of stuff. But that is a bit in the shadow, because Sagittarius, as the archer, the archetype of the archer, imagine popping off 20 arrows and you're just like so curious about a bunch of stuff and you just like, how many of those hit their targets? Probably not many. So the highest octave of an archer is when they pick one target that's far out in the distance and they concentrate on it, and they take careful aim before they shoot. So that is what some of my Neptune transits taught me to understand more about the Neptunian function within my own psyche. Is I have the capacity to dream far out into the cosmos, far out into the possibilities of what humanity is actually capable of. And that plays really well with my Scorpio tendencies of wanting to understand, the depths of the human unconscious and bring it to the surface so we can actually do something with it. But if you don't have your boundaries, Neptune can really kind of like overwhelm you in an oceanic sort of sense. And so again, it's about meeting our archetypes, having experiences in our lives that help us see different sides of the diamond of each one, and then understanding over time how they synthesize and play together so that we can play the instrument of our individual gardened unique humanity to the highest level. So finishing up with Pluto. Pluto is if you think of Uranus as the bulldozer that clears the way for new dreams that humanity desires to be brought to Earth, and then Neptune is that cosmic seed that drops those dreams down into the soil. Pluto is the cosmic builder, the cosmic archetype of new structures. And again, understanding, always keeping in mind the shadow, the gift, and the superpower. And obviously they have more delineations than that, but to keep it simple. If you have been just unconscious about kind of all of the stuff we've talked about previously, your Mars is just running amok. Your Venus is in its shadow. It's jealous. It's not getting the level of beauty it wants. Your Mercury is your intellectual function is in the gutter. You haven't gardened your purpose. You're in excess. Pluto is going to, and you resisted whatever Uranus wanted to clear for you. Pluto is just going to be the Lord of death. Pluto's often described in surface level astrology as the Lord of death and rebirth. Well, it does the job that, if you didn't pay attention to Uranus, clears the way for new things to be born, but it takes no prisoners, because it's going to do what you couldn't do. If you resisted, it's going to go ahead and just clean the slate so that new life can be born from a fresh start. However, if you paid attention to any Uranus and Neptune cycles you were having, and you did let go of old versions of yourself, you surrendered into the shedding of skin, of old skin that no longer served you, that was too constrictive, it was too tight for what you're meant to go into. Kind of like the idea of like what got you somewhere is not necessarily the vehicle that's going to get you to where you're going. Kind of in line with that vibe. Pluto, if you paid attention and you brought consciousness to all of that, Pluto is going to be the most divine builder in your life and help you build structures that are going to support you through to building your Jupiterian purpose, through to building the Neptunian dreams that flooded into you when you had maybe a Neptune trine transit. And that feels really exciting. And so yeah, so Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are the planets of the unconscious that kind of work as a triune function. And then we talked about, sun, moon. Oh, we forgot ascendant. Okay, so the ascendant, your rising sign, is the line of where Earth is, the line of the zodiac that the Earth is on the horizon when you were born. Hopefully, they captured exactly when you took your first breath, and it not only is they call it the masculine to the world sometimes, but really it has a lot to do with what you want to grow into in this life. A little bit North Node vibes, a little bit Jupiter vibes, and those can all work together. But it's really what you are meant to go into that experience in this life. I'm a Sagittarius, so I have a bunch of Scorpio energy and a bunch of Sagittarius energy. But the interesting and important thing about the ascendant is that it also sets the dial of your houses. So whatever house is on the cusp of the zodiac that was rising the moment you took your first breath, that ends up being house number one. And then you go through and so like my first house is Sagittarius. My second house is Capricorn. My third house, Aquarius. Fourth house, Pisces, and so on and so on and so forth. And I have Scorpio in the 12th house. So I can kind of go deep into my own internal world. But so basically, the planets of the conscious, Sun, Moon, Ascendant, Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, that is kind of the front facing. You really have a tangible grasp on all of those functions of your psyche. And once you understand all of those archetypes, blending the archetype of the planet, its shadows, gifts, and superpowers, blending the archetype of the costume that the zodiacal, the sign of the zodiac brings to that planet and its shadows, gifts, and superpowers, then you start to this becomes embodied. This becomes less intellectual, and it becomes installed in you. And that way, as you start to understand whatever function, whatever octave you're operating at for all of those archetypes within you, you start to see, aha, I keep repeating this pattern. My Mars isn't gardened. My Mars is like going out to do things that do not serve my purpose, don't serve the value of beauty I place in the world. Let me bring that in. Let me make sure I'm taking right action. And so it just becomes natural in how you move around in the world. And what does that do for you in a tangible sense? It saves you time. It saves you money. It gets you further to your purpose faster. This is really a process for making your psyche work in an efficient way. I think of it as cosmic efficiency. And that allows it, once you've gardened the planets of your conscious psyche, then you don't get overwhelmed when the unconscious planets, the planets of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto want to work with you, because you have the stamina and the capability for them to work through you. And I think that is like, then you are really getting the pearl of great price out of your life in this lifetime. It's what I'm gardening towards myself for, and it's what I, am passionate about helping people achieve in their lives. So there is so much more to all of this, of course, but it's something to absorb through osmosis over time. Astrology is a farmer's almanac to garden your life throughout the course of your lifetime. It's not just, a passing thing that will like clue you into some life hacks or, figure out when you're going to win the lottery or whatever kind of dreams you've got. It's truly how to become the most enabled version of your highest creative capabilities in this life. And so how do you get this information? Well, you can go to starelai.com. I created the deepest dive free birth chart on the internet. It will walk you through all of your natural strengths, where you're going to have some natural challenges in your life, but those are opportunities for up leveling, and you'll learn so much through doing that. You'll learn where you value beauty, how love kind of weaves into your life, where you can find like your highest alignment with your career, a career that aligns with your version of creativity, your highest impulse, the way your intellect functions, because it's a lot to put together by just like defining each one of your planets and being like, haha, really the beauty comes in the synthesis. And so the Starlight birth chart gives you a ton of that synthesis, as well as breaks down all of the components that is the recipe book of your birth chart. So it's really, really fun. It's awesome for self-care. I recommend to people who are just getting started with astrology to kind of read your birth chart, just, with a joint, with a glass of wine, whatever you're kind of like, or just totally sober, whatever you prefer, as like a Friday night or Saturday night, Sunday morning thing. And then for a month, maybe read it once a week. It takes about 30 minutes to read through the Starlight birth chart. And then it'll start to just sink into you, and the behaviors with which you can take in the world when you start to see something in your life that doesn't work, you'll be able to pick out from, the complicated interweavings of your psyche, what archetype is responsible for that pattern or that action or that aesthetic thing you don't like, whether it's in a relationship, business, platonic friendships, what have you. And you'll be able to see, aha, I can now get hyper clarity on how to tune that psychic function of mine so that I bring myself into more alignment, and that situation will eventually resolve itself. And so it's just a beautiful way to garden your life and your intuition. And so we'll talk a lot more about the wheel of the houses, the zodiac aspects, because you can go a lot deeper into this, but that all comes in time. So I think I probably talked more than 20 minutes. That tends to happen. But if you made it this far in the episode, thank you so much for joining me. I am so excited to drop more free tools into Starelai. We're doing a lot of cool stuff just to kind of like wrap up the new development we're doing in Starelai. We are adding features that allow you to chat with your journals. So like getting deeper insight into the big astral transits that you're going through, so you can get tangible awareness of how to meet the energies of new waves of initiation that you're facing. Like maybe you have some big Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto transits, or maybe you're in your Saturn return. Having the details of the archetypal mix that's going on makes it make sense when things go awry in your life, or it makes it make beautiful sense when you're in a period of like deep, a trine is happening for you, or a sextile is happening for you, and you're a period of deep creativity. So just getting that detail is amazing, and that's already available in Starlight. But the feature to chat with your journal I can't wait for y'all to use it. It is so amazing. And then the other hugely exciting feature we're adding is the ability to look up past and future personal natal transits. Y'all are going to go hog wild on that. If you've had anything like momentous in your life happen, which I've had a lot of things, to go back and see what natal transits were happening for you at that time. It really makes us, astrology really comes through when you kind of get that visibility. So that's all coming. Just stay tuned to the Instagram for any new things I'm dropping. And again, the DMs are always open on starelai.app. I love to talk about this. I love to talk about personal evolution, how we can garden ourselves to the highest frequency that we came here to be in this lifetime, because I believe in reincarnation, but I also think we got to leave it all on the table in every lifetime. So that's what I plan on doing. And in doing so, I plan on helping other people do that too. So anyway, thank you for joining. Cheers and toodles.